The morning started like any other travel day, but for Laura and Michael Hayes, it already felt heavier than usual. They had been on the road for 3 days straight, attending the funeral of Michael's father in another state. Their 2 kids, Lily and Noah, were only 6 and 4, too young to fully understand why everyone had been so sad lately. Still, they did their best to stay cheerful, clutching their small backpacks as they waited in line to board the plane. Laura tried to smile, but exhaustion tugged at every part of her. She hadn't slept much the night before. Between comforting the kids and packing everything back into their suitcases, she'd barely had a moment to breathe. The thought of finally being home again gave her a small sense of comfort. The gate agent called their boarding group, and they stepped onto the jet bridge. The kids were fascinated by the airplane windows and the distant roar of engines. Michael, steady as always, carried most of the luggage, trying to make things easier for Laura. He could sense how worn out she was, and though he didn't say much, his quiet way of helping spoke louder than words. As they reached the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeted them. She was in her mid-40s, neatly dressed, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag read Sandra. "Welcome aboard," she said quickly, her tone polite but clipped. She barely glanced at the children before motioning them toward their seats. Laura smiled politely and thanked her, trying to brush off the slightly cold tone. She was used to busy staff and rushed flights. People had bad days. She understood. But what she didn't know then was that this small moment would soon grow into something much bigger than she ever imagined. Their seats were near the back of the plane, the kind that barely gave enough room for 2 adults, let alone a family with 2 restless kids. Michael helped the children climb in, storing their small backpacks under the seats. The plane smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the usual mix of scents that came with early morning flights. Lily looked out the window, pressing her little hands to the glass. "Mommy, the other planes look tiny from here." Laura smiled softly. "They do, sweetheart." Noah wiggled in his seat, trying to reach the safety card in the pocket ahead of him. "Can I read this?" he asked eagerly. "Sure, honey. Just be careful with it." Sandra passed by their row as people continued to board. Her eyes flicked toward the kids, then to Laura, who was helping Noah adjust his seatbelt. She didn't say anything, but the slight sigh she made wasn't hard to notice. Laura felt a small sting of embarrassment. She wasn't sure why, but she could tell Sandra wasn't thrilled about having young children on board. Still, she decided not to let it get to her. They were polite, quiet so far, and just trying to make it through the flight. Once everyone was seated, the plane began to taxi. The children's eyes widened as the engines roared. Laura held Lily's hand, reassuring her when the plane lifted off the ground. The moment of takeoff always made her heart jump, but there was also a small thrill in it. That sense of rising, of moving closer to home. For a while, everything seemed peaceful. Noah colored quietly in his small travel book. Lily leaned against Laura's shoulder, humming softly. Michael closed his eyes, resting for a moment. Laura finally felt herself begin to relax. Then, during the first beverage service, the calm started to shift. Sandra came down the aisle with the cart, her movements sharp and precise. She stopped beside their row. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her tone firm, almost impatient. Laura smiled. "Yes, please. Just water for all of us." Sandra poured 2 small cups and handed them over. When Laura tried to balance the flimsy paper cups on the tray table, Noah accidentally bumped his elbow against one. The water spilled, splashing lightly on the tray and dripping onto Laura's jeans. "It's okay, sweetie," Laura said softly, reaching for some tissues. But before she could clean it up, Sandra let out a small, irritated laugh. "Maybe you should hold the drinks for them," she said loudly, glancing at nearby passengers. "These tables aren't playgrounds," the comment stung. Laura looked up, her cheeks flushing. She gave a small, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. It was just an accident." Sandra shrugged, still standing there. "Accidents happen, sure. But we do expect parents to manage things a bit better. It keeps the cabin tidy." Her tone carried a sharp edge, one that turned a few heads. Laura felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. Michael opened his eyes, noticing the tension. "Is everything all right here?" he asked calmly. Sandra straightened. "Everything's fine. Just a little spill," but her expression said otherwise. She handed Laura a stack of napkins with a forced smile and moved down the aisle. Laura cleaned the tray quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The children looked confused. Noah whispered. Mommy, did I do something bad? Laura's heart ached. No, honey. You didn't do anything wrong. It was just a little spill. Michael reached over, giving Laura's hand a gentle squeeze. Let it go, he whispered. We'll be home soon. She nodded, but inside she felt a mix of anger and sadness. It wasn't just about the water or the napkins. It was the way Sandra had spoken, loud enough for others to hear, as if to make an example out of them. An older woman across the aisle gave Laura a sympathetic look. Don't worry, dear, she said quietly. Some people forget what kindness looks like. Laura smiled weakly. Thank you. The rest of the flight continued, but the atmosphere felt different now. Laura couldn't fully relax. Every time Sandra walked past, she seemed to glance at their row, her expression unreadable. At one point, Lily needed to use the restroom. Laura stood and gently asked Sandra if she could help her daughter down the narrow aisle. Sandra sighed before replying, Make it quick. We're about to start another service. Her words came out with that same cold tone, the kind that made Laura's stomach tighten. She guided Lily to the restroom, trying not to let her frustration show. As they returned, Laura noticed a few passengers watching quietly. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked away. It was as if everyone could sense the tension, but didn't know how to respond. Back in their seats, Laura tried to focus on keeping the children calm and occupied. She told stories, handed them crayons, and even tried to read a few pages from a magazine. But every few minutes, her mind replayed Sandra's sharp voice. Why did she have to be so unkind? Laura wondered. She had traveled enough to know that not every flight was smooth. But this felt unnecessarily harsh. The pilot's voice eventually came over the intercom, announcing that they would be landing in about 40 minutes. Relief washed over Laura. She looked at Michael, who gave her a small, knowing smile. They were almost through it. As the plane began to descend, the kids pressed their faces to the window, watching the clouds drift by. For a moment, the beauty of it all softened the rough edges of the morning. But just before landing, Sandra made another round, checking seatbelts and trays. When she reached their row, she paused. Please make sure your children's belts are snug, she said. Then, almost under her breath, she added, We don't need any more surprises from this row. Laura heard it clearly. She looked up, startled, but Sandra had already moved on. Michael clenched his jaw but said nothing. He knew causing a scene wouldn't help. Instead, he reached for Laura's hand again, holding it tightly as the plane touched down. When the wheels hit the runway, everyone exhaled. The landing was smooth, but Laura's heart still raced. She couldn't wait to get off that plane. As the aircraft rolled to a stop and people began standing, Sandra stood near the exit, greeting passengers as they left. Her tone had shifted again, cheerful, professional, almost as if nothing had happened. When it was their turn to pass, Laura forced a polite smile. Thank you, she said quietly, even though every part of her wanted to say something else. Sandra gave a stiff nod. Have a good day. Outside the gate, Laura exhaled deeply. Michael helped the kids gather their things. The sunlight from the terminal windows felt warm and welcoming after the tense flight. Laura didn't realize then that this uncomfortable experience wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. What happened next would leave everyone on that flight, including Sandra, completely speechless. But for now, all she wanted was to get her family home, away from the stares and whispers, and back to a place where kindness didn't feel like too much to ask for. The next morning, the Hayes family woke up early for their connecting flight home. The first flight had already drained them, and the idea of facing another long journey felt heavy. But Laura tried to keep things positive. She knew that once they landed, they could finally rest, unpack, and start moving forward again after the difficult week they had just been through. The children were still half asleep as they rode the airport shuttle to the terminal. Noah leaned against Michael's shoulder, clutching his little stuffed bear, while Lily stared out the window, counting airplanes. Laura carried the tickets and boarding passes in one hand, holding coffee in the other. She hadn't had much energy left, but she was determined to keep calm and patient. When they arrived at the gate, Laura's heart sank. The gate display showed the same airline from the previous day, and by some strange twist of fate, the same flight attendant, Sandra, stood near the counter, checking paperwork. Michael noticed her too. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered softly. Laura sighed, unsure what to do. Maybe Sandra wouldn't remember them. Maybe she'd be in a better mood today. It was a big airline after all. Maybe this was just coincidence. But deep down, Laura's stomach tightened. She still remembered that sharp voice, the way the woman had looked at them with judgment instead of compassion. When boarding began, the family waited patiently until their group was called. The line moved slowly and the children were getting restless. Noah tugged at Laura's sleeve, whispering that he was hungry. She promised they'd get snacks after takeoff. As they reached the aircraft door, Sandra's eyes flicked up. The polite smile she gave other passengers faltered for a split second when she saw them. "Oh," she said flatly. "You again." Laura blinked, unsure how to respond. "Yes, just heading home," she said softly, trying to keep things light. Sandra gave a short nod but didn't reply. Her expression said enough. Michael gave Laura a look that said, "Let's just ignore it." They found their seats, this time closer to the middle of the plane. Laura helped the kids get settled and handed them their coloring books. She could feel Sandra's presence as the attendant moved through the aisles, checking bags and passengers. Once everyone was seated, the usual announcements played. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, hoping the flight would just pass quickly and quietly. But peace didn't last long. Not even 20 minutes into the flight, Lily accidentally dropped her crayon box. It bounced off the tray and spilled onto the floor, scattering bright bits of color under the seats. Before Laura could pick them up, Sandra appeared again, frowning deeply. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, shaking her head. "Can we please keep things under control this time?" Laura froze. Her hands trembled as she bent down to gather the crayons. "I'm sorry, I'll clean it up." Sandra crossed her arms. "It's not just about cleaning, ma'am. We can't have this kind of disruption during service. Other passengers shouldn't have to deal with—" Michael interrupted calmly but firmly. "Excuse me, she's already taking care of it. There's no need to make a scene." Sandra's eyebrows shot up. "A scene? I'm doing my job." Michael's voice stayed level. "Your job doesn't include embarrassing passengers." The air around them went quiet. Passengers nearby looked up, pretending not to stare but clearly listening. The tension was thick enough to feel. Sandra's lips tightened. "Well," she said, her tone sharp, "if passengers respected the rules, there'd be nothing to embarrass anyone about." She turned and walked off, her shoes clicking down the aisle. Laura could feel her face burning. She wanted to disappear. She hated public conflict, especially in front of the children. Lily sat quietly now, clutching her bear. "Mommy, did I do something wrong again?" she whispered. Laura shook her head quickly. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. It was just an accident." Michael leaned closer to Laura. "She's out of line," he whispered. "But don't worry. Just stay calm. We'll handle this after the flight." Laura nodded, but her chest felt heavy. She kept replaying the moment. The loud tone, the cold stare, the way everyone turned to look. It wasn't just the words, it was the humiliation. The flight dragged on slowly. Sandra passed by several times, avoiding eye contact with their row. When another flight attendant offered drinks, she gave Laura a kind smile, as if silently apologizing on Sandra's behalf. That small kindness helped more than she expected. Laura sipped her water, glancing around. Most passengers seemed to have forgotten about the earlier moment, lost in movies or books. But one man a few rows ahead kept glancing back from time to time. He looked older, maybe in his 60s, dressed neatly in a business suit. His expression was calm but curious, like he had seen everything but wasn't ready to speak up yet. When the snack service started, Sandra was back in their section. She handed out pretzels and drinks quickly. When she reached Laura's row, her smile returned, but it was the kind of smile that didn't feel genuine. "Pretzels?" she asked shortly. "Yes, thank you," Laura said, forcing politeness into her tone. Sandra handed over the small packets but accidentally dropped one onto Noah's lap. "Oops," she said without real apology. "You'll manage." Michael inhaled sharply, but before he could respond, the man from earlier stood up. His calm voice carried down the aisle. "Excuse me," he said. "I think it might be best to show a little more patience. They've done nothing wrong." Sandra turned, startled. Sir, please take your seat, I'm working. I can see that, he said evenly, but I also see how you've been speaking to them since boarding. I believe courtesy is also part of your job. The passengers around them turned quiet. All eyes shifted toward the scene. Sandra's cheeks flushed pink. Sir, I don't need a lecture. I know how to do my job. The man nodded slightly. I'm sure you do, but kindness doesn't make it harder. It makes it better for everyone here. Sandra frowned. And who exactly are you to tell me how to do my work? The man gave a faint smile. You'll find out soon enough. Then he sat back down, leaving the cabin buzzing with whispers. Laura didn't know what to say. Her heart was racing again, but for the first time it wasn't just from embarrassment, it was from surprise. Someone had finally stood up for them. Michael leaned over, whispering, Who do you think he is? I have no idea, Laura said quietly. But he didn't sound like just another passenger. For the rest of the flight, Sandra stayed unusually quiet whenever she passed their row. Her tone softened, her steps slower. The passengers nearby smiled more kindly at the family, as if silently supporting them. Noah soon fell asleep with his head against Michael's arm, while Lily colored peacefully again. Laura finally exhaled, the knot in her stomach loosening slightly. When the pilot announced the descent, the cabin lights dimmed. Outside, the clouds parted to reveal a city shimmering in sunlight below. It was beautiful, and for a brief moment, Laura felt hopeful again. The plane touched down smoothly. People clapped softly as it rolled to a stop. Sandra stood near the exit, looking slightly nervous now. The man who had spoken up earlier waited patiently in his seat until the passengers ahead began filing out. As Laura and Michael gathered their bags, she saw the man glance toward them and give a small, reassuring nod. His expression was calm but carried a quiet authority, like someone used to taking charge in difficult situations. When they finally reached the exit, Sandra's voice trembled slightly as she said her usual farewell. Goodbye. Thank you for flying with us. Laura gave a polite nod and kept walking. She didn't want to say more, not yet, but just as they stepped off the plane, she noticed two uniformed airline staff members waiting by the door. One of them walked directly toward the older man, greeting him respectfully. Sir, we've arranged a meeting room for you and the captain, the staff member said quietly. Sandra froze in place. Her smile disappeared. She looked from the staff member to the man, realization slowly dawning in her eyes. The man simply nodded, glancing back toward Laura and her family. I'll join you shortly, he said. Then turning to Laura, he smiled kindly. You handled yourself with grace, ma'am. Not everyone would have. Laura blinked, unsure what to say. Thank you, she whispered. The man adjusted his jacket and walked off with the airline staff, leaving Sandra standing stiffly by the cabin door, pale and silent. Michael gently guided Laura and the kids toward the terminal. I think, he said quietly, that this story isn't over yet. Laura nodded, still stunned. She didn't know who that man was, but she had a feeling they were about to find out something that would change everything. Laura didn't say much as they walked through the terminal. Her mind was racing, replaying the strange scene that had unfolded just moments earlier. The man's calm confidence, the way the airline staff greeted him, it all hinted that he wasn't just a regular passenger. Michael noticed her silence. You're thinking about him, aren't you? He asked softly. Laura nodded. Yes. I just can't figure out who he was. He seemed so composed, like he had authority over everyone on that plane. Michael gave a faint smile. Whoever he is, I'm glad he spoke up. It's been a long time since someone stepped in like that. Lily tugged at Laura's sleeve. Mommy, are we going home now? Laura knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. Yes, sweetheart. Just one more thing and then we'll go home. But deep down, she sensed that something was still unfolding. As they reached the baggage claim area, an airline staff member approached. She was polite and spoke gently. Excuse me, are you the Hayes family? Laura hesitated for a second. Yes, that's us. Please come with me for a moment, the woman said. There's someone who would like to speak with you. Michael frowned. Is there a problem? Oh, not at all, the woman replied quickly. It's just a follow-up regarding your flight experience. Laura and Michael exchanged a look. The kids followed quietly as they were led through a side door into a small private lounge. Inside, they saw the man from the plane sitting comfortably at a table with the captain of the flight. Sandra, the flight attendant, stood near the wall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The air in the room felt heavy. When the family entered, the man stood and smiled warmly. Ah, the Hayes family. Thank you for taking a moment to speak with us. Laura was still unsure what to say. Of course, she managed, glancing nervously at Sandra, who wouldn't meet her eyes. The captain spoke first. I understand there was a bit of a situation on the flight, he said. We'd like to make sure everything is handled properly. Michael nodded slowly. There was. My wife and children were spoken to in a way that was, frankly, unnecessary and unprofessional, but we weren't planning to file any complaint. We just wanted to get home. The man smiled faintly. That's very kind of you. But I believe this situation deserves attention. Allow me to introduce myself. He reached into his jacket and handed Michael a business card. It had the airline's logo on it embossed in gold. Beneath the name, it read Regional Operations Director. Laura's eyes widened. You're with the airline? He nodded. Yes, I was flying under standard conditions today, no special arrangements. I like to experience our flights the way passengers do. It helps me see things clearly, especially when something goes wrong. Sandra's face had gone pale. She looked down at the floor, her lips trembling slightly. The man continued, his tone still calm but firm. What I witnessed today was not only disappointing but also unacceptable. This family was treated with impatience and disrespect from the moment they boarded. That's not what we stand for. Laura felt a rush of mixed emotions, relief, disbelief, and even a little sadness. She didn't want anyone to be in trouble, but she also couldn't deny how painful those moments had been. The director turned toward her. Mrs. Hayes, I saw how you handled yourself. You were polite, calm, and patient. Not everyone would have shown that level of restraint in your position. For that, I want to personally apologize. Not as a representative of the company, but as a fellow human being. Laura felt her eyes sting. Thank you, she said quietly. I appreciate that more than you know. Sandra finally spoke, her voice shaky. Sir, I didn't mean to, It's been a hard week and I lost my patience. I didn't realize, the director raised a hand gently. I understand everyone has difficult days, Ms. Rivers, but professionalism doesn't disappear because we're tired. Respect should never depend on who's sitting in the seat. Sandra nodded, tears filling her eyes. You're right. I'm sorry. She turned toward Laura. I truly am. I was wrong to treat you that way. Laura hesitated, then gave a small nod. Thank you for saying that, she said softly. The captain spoke again. We'll be filing a report and there will be follow-up. But our main concern right now is making sure your family feels safe and respected. Michael placed a hand on Laura's shoulder. We appreciate that, he said. We really do. The director smiled again, this time warmly. If there's anything we can do to make this right, future flight vouchers, accommodations, or even just peace of mind, please let us know. Laura shook her head gently. We don't need anything. Honestly, just hearing you acknowledge what happened means a lot. The director seemed impressed by her humility. That says a great deal about you, Mrs. Hayes. He then turned to the captain. Please ensure this family's luggage is handled personally and that they're escorted to their transportation. I don't want them waiting another minute. As the meeting wrapped up, Sandra stepped forward again. Her face was red, but her tone was genuine. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, I know an apology can't undo what happened, but I'll remember this. I'll do better, Laura smiled faintly. That's all anyone can do, she said kindly. As they left the room, Laura felt lighter somehow. Not because of the authority in the room, but because empathy had finally replaced judgment. Outside, the terminal felt bright and open again. The children ran ahead toward the window, watching planes take off. Michael walked beside Laura quietly for a while before saying, You know, you handled that better than I ever could have. Laura laughed softly. I wasn't sure I could handle it at all. They sat for a moment, watching the kids. Travelers hurried by, announcements echoed overhead, and yet for the first time in days, Laura felt calm. After a few minutes, the director reappeared carrying 2 envelopes. He handed one to Laura. "This is just a small gesture. Complimentary tickets for your next trip. Not because we want to buy forgiveness, but because we want to show gratitude for your grace under pressure." Laura hesitated, then accepted it with a thankful smile. "That's very kind of you." He handed the second envelope to Michael. "And this," he said quietly, "is something a little different." Michael opened it. Inside was a note written in careful handwriting. It read, "To those who choose patience when faced with unkindness, you remind the rest of us what true decency looks like." Michael read it silently, then looked up. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." The director gave a small nod. "You deserve it. Safe travels, both of you." He walked away, leaving them standing there, stunned, touched, and quietly amazed by how everything had turned out. As they headed toward the exit, Lily tugged on Laura's sleeve again. "Mommy, who was that nice man?" Laura smiled, her eyes still a little watery. "Someone who believes in doing the right thing," she said softly. Noah added, "He talked to the mean lady, right?" Laura nodded gently. "Yes, but he wasn't mean back. He just wanted her to learn something." Michael picked up Noah and smiled. "Sometimes kindness teaches louder than anger does." They made their way to the car rental area, the kids skipping ahead. The sun was setting outside, casting a soft golden glow through the airport windows. It felt symbolic somehow, like the end of a long, difficult chapter. As they stepped into the car, Laura looked out at the runway in the distance. A plane lifted into the sky, glowing in the last light of day. She thought about how something as ordinary as a flight could turn into a lesson about patience, respect, and the power of standing up quietly for what's right. Michael started the engine, and the hum of the road filled the silence. After a while, Laura spoke softly. "You know, maybe we needed this to happen. Maybe it reminded us that even when people are unkind, we can still choose how we respond." Michael nodded. "And maybe it reminded her too," Laura smiled. "I hope so." They drove on, leaving behind the noise of the airport and the weight of the past few days. Ahead of them was home, the promise of rest, healing, and maybe a new understanding of the world. The children laughed in the back seat, pointing out lights and buildings as they passed. Their innocence was a reminder that even after hard moments, there's always something pure left to hold on to. As they reached the highway, Laura leaned her head against the window and watched the stars begin to appear. For the first time in what felt like forever, her heart felt steady again. What started as a moment of humiliation on a plane had ended with something far greater. A lesson in empathy, a spark of humanity, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing grace when it's hardest. And as the city lights faded behind them, Laura couldn't help but smile to herself. Sometimes, the most unexpected people remind us what kindness truly looks like. Not with grand gestures, but with simple understanding. The next few days passed quietly for Laura and her family. They finally arrived home, unpacked their bags, and tried to settle back into their normal life. The familiar smell of their house, the soft hum of the kitchen fan, and the sound of the kids laughing in the living room all made Laura feel grounded again. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the man from the plane, the airline director who had stood up for them without hesitation. Something about his calm authority had stayed in her mind. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. Steady, fair, and deeply human. Michael, on the other hand, seemed unusually quiet since they'd returned. He would sit by the window with a cup of coffee, reading through some work emails, but Laura could tell his thoughts were elsewhere. On the third morning after their trip, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Michael, with the airline's logo printed neatly on the envelope. Laura placed it on the kitchen table. "It's from the airline again," she said. Michael looked up, took the envelope, and opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter typed on crisp paper, but attached beneath it was a handwritten note. The same careful, tidy handwriting she remembered from the one the director had given them at the airport. The typed letter thanked Michael for his cooperation during the flight and for his patience, but the handwritten part said something that caught Laura's attention immediately. "Mr. Hayes, it was an honor meeting you. I understand now why your calm presence commanded such quiet respect in that situation. I've since learned of your position, and it gives even more weight to the lesson we all learned that day." Laura frowned softly. Your position? She asked. What does he mean? Michael set the letter down and sighed. I suppose it's time I tell you what that meant. Laura blinked, confused. What are you talking about? He smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. You remember when I said I worked in aviation safety? Yes, she said. You've been doing that for years. Well, he continued slowly, what I don't usually tell people, not even most family, is that I'm one of the senior inspectors with the Federal Aviation Administration. I handle oversight for flight operations and crew conduct. That means, technically, people like that flight attendant fall under the kinds of situations my office can investigate. Laura's eyes widened. Wait, you mean you were on that flight as both a grieving son and unintentionally as an FAA official, he said softly. But I wasn't traveling in any professional capacity. I didn't plan to say anything or pull rank. We were just trying to get home. Laura sat back, speechless. She finally understood why the director's letter had sounded so careful, and why he'd looked so surprised when he learned who Michael was. So that's why they handled it so seriously, she said. They realized who you were after the flight. Michael nodded. Probably. But honestly, I wish none of that mattered. People should be treated with respect regardless of who they are. Laura nodded in agreement. Exactly. It shouldn't take a title or authority for someone to deserve kindness. Later that afternoon, Michael received a phone call. It was the same airline director calling personally to thank him again and to inform him that Sandra had entered a retraining program for staff dealing with customer service under stress. She requested it herself, the director explained over the phone. She wanted to make things right, and she said meeting your family changed the way she views passengers, especially those with kids. Michael smiled slightly. That's good to hear. I never wanted to see her punished. I just wanted her to realize the impact her words can have. The director paused for a moment. Mr. Hayes, there's something else. The story from that flight. It started to spread. Some passengers posted about it online. Nothing personal, just how you and your family handled everything. People are sharing it as an example of patience and dignity. Michael raised an eyebrow. Online? Yes, the director said with a chuckle. It's not every day something good goes viral. After hanging up, Michael told Laura about it. She laughed, half in disbelief. We've gone viral for staying calm? That's a first. But over the next few days, she saw it was true. On social media, there were posts describing a kind family who was treated unfairly by a flight attendant and a mysterious man who defended them. The comments were full of people sharing stories of their own travel experiences, the good, the bad, and the lessons they learned from them. One comment caught Laura's eye. It said, "You never know who you're talking to. But even if they were nobody important, everyone deserves respect." She smiled softly. That, she thought, summed it up perfectly. A week later, the airline invited the Hayes family to their local headquarters for a brief meeting. They wanted to personally apologize again and thank them for the way they handled the entire situation. Laura hesitated at first. Do we really have to go? She asked. I don't want it to turn into some media thing. But Michael reassured her. They said it's private, just a conversation. When they arrived, the same director greeted them at the entrance. He looked relaxed and warm, shaking both their hands firmly. It's good to see you again, he said. You have no idea how much your story has influenced our staff training already. He led them into a small conference room with large windows overlooking the airport runways. Sandra was there too, standing nervously near the table. She looked different, more humble, softer somehow. When she saw Laura and Michael, she immediately stepped forward. Thank you for agreeing to meet me again, she said. I've been wanting to say something in person. Laura smiled gently. You already apologized, that was enough. Sandra shook her head. No, it wasn't. I realized after that flight that I'd been treating passengers like checklists, not people. I let stress turn me into someone I didn't like. I've been in training since then, learning how to deal with pressure the right way. I even volunteered to mentor new attendants about empathy. Michael nodded approvingly. That's good to hear. Change starts with awareness. Sandra's eyes softened. You taught me that even without saying a word. You and your wife showed kindness when I didn't deserve it. I'll never forget that. Laura felt a lump rise in her throat. We all have hard days, she said quietly. What matters is how we grow from them. The director watched the exchange with a smile. You see why I wanted this meeting? He said. This isn't just about resolving an issue. It's about reminding us that decency still exists, even in the smallest moments. They talked, for a while longer, sharing travel stories, family anecdotes, and even some laughter. The tension that had once filled the air between them was gone. In its place was understanding, genuine and simple. Before they left, the director handed Laura a small envelope. Inside was a note written on airline stationery. It read, Sometimes, the most powerful lessons in leadership come not from the top, but from those who simply choose kindness when it's hardest. Laura folded it carefully and smiled. Thank you, she said softly. As they stepped outside, the kids ran ahead again, chasing each other near the lobby windows. Laura watched them with a gentle smile. The sunlight poured through the glass, casting long shadows across the floor. Michael slipped his arm around her shoulders. You know, he said, I think your calmness that day taught everyone something, even me. She laughed lightly. My calmness? You were the one keeping me from saying something I'd regret. He grinned. Maybe we balance each other out. They stood there for a while, watching planes take off into the bright afternoon sky. Each one seemed like a symbol of a new start, a reminder that even when things go wrong, there's always a way to rise above them. Later that evening, as they drove home, Laura scrolled through her phone. One of the top news sites had picked up the story, this time with an official statement from the airline. It read, We recently witnessed an inspiring example of patience and kindness from passengers who reminded us what true respect looks like. We are committed to carrying that spirit forward in all our future service. She showed it to Michael. Look at that, she said softly. Something good really did come from all of it. Michael smiled as the car rolled down the quiet street toward home. It's funny, he said. It started with one person being rude, and ended with hundreds learning to be kind. Laura nodded, watching the sunset through the window. That's how change usually starts, small and unexpected. As the last light faded, she thought back to the moment on the plane when she'd felt helpless and humiliated. Now that memory felt distant, not painful anymore, but powerful, because from that single uncomfortable moment, something beautiful had grown, understanding, compassion, and maybe even forgiveness. And in the calm quiet of the evening, she realized that sometimes life puts us in hard situations not to break us, but to remind us, and others, what grace really looks like. A few months had passed since that unforgettable flight. The world had moved on, but for Laura and her family, the memory of that day stayed fresh. Not because of the unpleasant part, but because of what came after it. Life slowly fell back into its ordinary rhythm. The children were back in school. The house was full of the usual sounds: laughter, arguments over homework, and the clatter of dishes after dinner. Michael went back to work, traveling for inspections now and then, while Laura focused on writing again, something she'd put on hold for years. But something in both of them had changed. They seemed more patient, more observant. Small moments, a stranger holding the door, a tired cashier forcing a smile, an elderly passenger struggling with luggage, caught their attention in new ways. Laura had started keeping a journal after the incident. Not a fancy one, just a plain notebook where she wrote about kindness, small acts she noticed each day. She called it the kindness log. Every night before bed, she wrote one thing that made her believe people could still be good. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table flipping through its pages. There were dozens of small stories: a boy giving up his seat on the bus, a neighbor dropping off soup when the kids were sick, even a stranger who helped her carry groceries to the car. Michael walked in and saw her reading. "Still writing in that thing?" he asked with a grin. Laura smiled. "Yeah, it keeps me grounded. Reminds me there's more good out there than bad. He nodded and leaned against the counter. You know, I've been thinking about that flight a lot lately. It started as one of the worst experiences we've ever had, and somehow turned into one of the most meaningful. It did, Laura agreed softly. Maybe that's how lessons come to us. We never see them coming. A few weeks later, Laura received an unexpected email from the airline's communication team. They were preparing a video series called Voices of Kindness, short real-life stories about moments that inspired change, and they wanted to include her family's experience. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure about being in front of a camera or revisiting that painful day. But the email ended with one simple sentence. Your story reminds people that empathy still matters. That line convinced her. When she told Michael about it, he smiled. If sharing what happened can help someone else, then it's worth it. So a week later, a small film crew visited their home. They set up lights in the living room, but kept things simple and comfortable. The kids played quietly in their room while Laura and Michael sat together on the couch. The interviewer asked gentle questions, how they felt that day, what they learned, and why they thought the story resonated with so many. Laura spoke from the heart, describing the embarrassment, the shock, but also the kindness that followed. How the director's empathy, the flight attendant's apology, and the passenger's support changed her view of people.